We often have meetings, and I'll sometimes say to a writer, that's a subject, not a story. And what I mean by that is that there are a lot of subjects out in the world, urban poverty or illiteracy or the insanity of the House of Representatives, to take one example. It's not a story. In other words, it's not a New Yorker story. It's a subject that you could find in the paper every day. What is it that you want as opposed to what is not going to work? Somebody who does what for you?
For someone who illustrates some deeper structural issues. I think it's one thing to have an individual story that people can feel deeply about, but I think you want to find the stories that plug into and illustrate something deeper and systemic that is wrong with the way that we're going about these things. In this case, people who were sent into very, very dangerous drug things without any policy on the books for officers to use as to how are they going to regulate these things? So for me, I'm often looking at the intersection of kind of intimate, personal, and often traumatic experience and the kind of sociological kind of step back and look at what are the systemic structural issues at stake here.
You did something that was the polar opposite. You lived with not just with the book, but the people in one form or another for a decade. These people, some of them grew up. They changed. They went to jail. They died. They
got out of jail.
They got out of jail. That's how long it was. And then something else happens. You publish the book. They read the book. You continue a relationship. How does that work?
Well, I know the most nerve-wracking moment I would say perhaps in my career to date in a way was the day that I distributed the book to the people in that first project. I had deep connections with them. I love some of them. We're close friends still. But I was about to say this is about another thing. What we experienced together was in the service of many things happened, but my ambition for that.
It's instrumental.
It was
They've
instrumental.
Become characters in a book.
And it was very difficult. I know writers who do immersion work who say that they can't be in touch with their subjects when they're writing because it's very difficult to sustain them in your imagination and your mind as characters when they are, in fact, on the phone calling you about something.
But temperamentally, I'm a little ill-suited for investigative journalism because I don't like to hurt people's feelings and I want to make people feel comfortable. And I realize that can even go so overboard as to be kind of patronizing when you almost want to protect someone from their own traumatic story when they're saying something that's very clearly difficult for them. Realizing that sometimes I have this tendency almost to silence someone, and realizing people actually have the right to decide when they want to share their stories and how. And because Kate Boo is not here, but I admire her so tremendously, I can say something that I once read of hers in an interview that really stuck with me after Hurricane Katrina, when she was reporting from a shelter there with someone who had just lost everything. And the woman said to Kate Boo, she said, let me get this straight. So you're saying that in this process, I say all these things to you, and then you go put them in a magazine that rich people read, and then you get paid and I don't? That sounds like some backward crap to me. And that really stuck with me because on the other hand, I will say I'm always struck by how much people want to be listened to and want to be heard. And when you create that space for what George is talking about, a genuine connection, and create room for someone to have what happened to them validated, I think that counts for a lot and is sort of my way around the guilt of cannibalism.
I think the two actually overlap in a way that allows you to live with yourself. Because great stuff is also an emotional connection to the person you're talking to. So that it's not quite as detached as that. I'm never imagining how it's going to read on the page. And yes, there is an element of manipulation, and there's an element maybe of even betrayal, but it's never as raw and naked as that. Because
or acting. In other words, not necessarily betrayal, but sort of, I am going to be a certain way so I can get this out of you.
I feel that if I were to do that, and to become conscious of it, maybe I'm doing it unconsciously, but if I were aware of doing that, I don't think that it would work. They'd be onto it. People are really sensitive when they're telling you the story that matters the most to them.
You're writing about this guy. You're never going to meet him. It's not like you can call up, Peggy Siegel at the PR agency and say, I'd like access to Azam the American.
I tried to send him an email, though.
Yeah, I remember. You have to do what's called in the business a write-around. Is there an advantage in this as well as the obvious disadvantages? How do you go about it?
Well, you go about it because you want to know how this person, at least in the case of this guy who joined Al-Qaeda, how he made this journey, why he made this journey. And there was so much that could be revealed by this one person who didn't just join Al-Qaeda at a low level, but entered for a time the upper ranks of this organization. For me, I start with what's most widely available. He was really into a kind of music called death metal, and I said, okay, well, this seems like I could, get my head around this. I started talking to death metal guys, and the key is to sit down and really listen to what they're trying to say, and then slowly try and earn the trust of the people who know this person and work your way closer to, the person who's missing, who's absent at the center.
When you're looking into these notes, how do you get to the next thing?
The first piece I did for the magazine, actually, I really didn't know, where do you go with this? How do you put all of these, disparate stories into a coherent narrative? So I sat down and I just decided, I need my list of 5. I'm going to have the 5 things that I have an almost physiological reaction to when I go back through my notes. The thing you were talking about, the vibrations in your body, holy crap, this happened to this person. I made my list of the 5 things that I found kind of most shocking in my own response to the things that I'd seen. And then I figured out who's kind of the vehicle for the story. And even though some workers had experienced much worse than the women I ended up focusing on, I'd met this group of Fijian women who worked in a beauty salon, and I decided, they were the people who could carry me from beginning to end. I know Lawrence Wright calls it the donkey, and I don't tend to prefer that term, but you've got to have the person who's going to, as a character, kind of allow you to go on this journey from beginning to end.
I've done 2 pieces now where many things happen simultaneously, and trying to accommodate into the linear act of reading can actually be especially difficult. So for me, when I went down to write about the cleanup of a Gulf oil spill, and I was just this ensemble cast, and it really wasn't until I came back and started piecing it together that I realized, okay, I will need these people to tell this through line. And then sometimes there's actually a second round of calls that you need because you realized on the ground you didn't see things from up on high that you do when you're chair in front of the computer to sort of put it together. That for me is a very exciting time because now I know when I'm making a phone call, I know exactly what I want. I want this person to fill this gap to help me tell this story. I love that part of it.
You're working on something for 10 years. Do you get to the end of it and say, I swear to God, next time, 4 years?
I thought
for all
2
kinds
years.
of reasons.
2 years, I thought, 2 years. This is 2 years. And but I think all the doubts, the crippling, paralyzing doubt that I probably should have around 2 or 3 years in, it all gets saved up till the writing. I mean, I have this, if you said to me, that's a subject, that's not a story, I'd say, oh, it's a story. I'm going to show you it's a story. I just know it's a story against all logic or sense of well-being, the need for income, a social life.
We haven't discussed that. I mean, it's not unimportant.
But I do know that I'm after something and there's a place I need to be. I just keep needing to go back to that person or to that place, or I start to organize my thinking around the subjects, and I think of it as, I call them lily pads, sort of what you're saying about those. They're just, I know that it's a little resting place in the narrative. So if I were a little frog and I needed to rest in a big pond, I have a lily pad where I can hop onto it, and it's a scene, it's a gesture that I witness, it's some character detail, and those tend to lift off if they're keepers. When I finally write that, I can go forward from those, and then a lot of them are dead ends.
I don't offer information about myself just sort of as a matter of course, but if someone asks me a question after I've asked them 100, it would be a little bit impertinent to say I'm not going to talk about myself. But I also think we have to establish how weird and different what we're talking about is from most reporting. First of all, ground rules. Ground rules are the absolute bane of reporting today. In Washington, you've got these multiple, they've got on background with quote approval. Well, what the hell is that?
Every Washington conversation now begins with, let's just talk, and then later we'll see if we can
So
find
that
some
will
quote.
never work.
That's
for
the
this.
standard. You talk to like the guy you're getting a hot dog from.
And exactly. And now that's spread to the world of business and probably the world of sport. Anywhere that people have some power, they're going to say, you don't get to talk to me unless I absolutely dictate the terms. Whereas we're talking to people who aren't even aware that they are allowed to dictate terms, which I think imposes a responsibility on us to sort of, in some ways, to protect them from what they don't know.